Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to our seminar this evening. My name is David Shankland, and I have the honour to be the chairman of the Society. And just before we introduce our speaker, just a couple of little announcements. As you know, we have been running virtual events during this time of COVID, but now we are trying for the first time a couple of face-to-face ones. So a reminder that, as you will see from our website, we have papers by we have a paper by Dr. Andrews, who will be talking about the making of ethnic groups in Turkey at the Royal Anthropological Institute next week. And also we have a concert as well with wonderful musicians, the musicians who played to us for our annual luncheon just before Christmas. So that will be very nice for those of you who can make it. For those of you who can't, well, of course, we'll carry on with these virtual events as well. And one way or another, I hope that we can catch up soon. Well, that's enough from me. I would now like to welcome our speaker this evening, who's going to talk to us about a fascinating topic. I'm sure one that we know pretty much nothing about. So it's wonderful to be introduced to something new. And Nikos Michailidis has been researching this topic for more than a decade now. And as you will hear, his talk covers the Greek-Turkish relations and volunteers from Istanbul who fought in the Second World War. Well, I think that's enough for me, except to say that we are delighted to have Mr. Michailidis with us this evening, and we look forward very much to his talk, after which we'll have the normal discussion. So we pass it to you. Thank you very much indeed.
First of all, I would like to thank you again for your inviting me to your society. Since my youth, I have devoted most of my free time to the study and research of history on issues concerning Istanbul and the Balkans. My book is written in the Greek language, and its title is The Turkish-Greek Relation in 1939, from 1939 to 1944. And the volunteers from Istanbul during the World War II. I will try to describe in a relatively short time a book of about 800 it's quite big pages. So let me start by making a very brief description of the Greek-Turkish historical relations and events from 1912 to 1939. That's about 27 years before the start of the war. This decade, from the Balkan Wars of 1912 to 1922, finds Greece and Turkey considered winners and losers at the same time. The Ottoman Empire is considered a loser because by the end of the First World War and the Treaty of Sevres in August 1920, it shrinks and is limited to its Asia Minor part, losing huge areas such as Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, the Far East, the Dodecanese. The annexation of Cyprus to England is recognized. It loses Eastern Thrace, up to the outskirts of Istanbul. The islands of Imbros and Tenedos, Bojada, it loses part of present-day Saudi Arabia, while Kurdistan and Armenia are recognized as independent states. But from the other point of view, however, Turkey is considered a winner because it managed until 1922 to defeat all the foreign powers that dissolved the empire. The new government that succeeded the Sultan managed to repeal the Treaty of Sevres, and a year later, in 1923, to sign the Treaty of Lausanne and to establish the current Turkish national state limited to its current borders. Greece is considered the winner because by signing the Treaty of Sevres, It ended up doubling its territories and population, annexing Crete, a large port of Macedonia, Epirus, Thrace, the islands of Eastern Aegean, and acquired large cities such as Thessaloniki and Ioannina. After the end of the Asia Minor campaign, Greece is considered defeated due to the destruction and removal of the Greek Orthodox from their ancestral homes in Asia Minor and Eastern Thrace. Without the expulsion of the Greek army from Asia Minor by the Turks, led by Kemal Atatürk, the Treaty of Sevres is abolished. On July 24, 1923, the Treaty of Lausanne is signed and the population is exchanged on basis of religion. After the Treaty of Lausanne, the Greek Orthodox with Turkish citizenship shrunk to Istanbul, speaking the Greek language. To this large community and reach of about 300 people, a relatively large number, Greek citizens was added. Thus, a unique phenomenon was gradually observed, the assimilation of people of different origins and their Hellenization in a foreign country. The newly established Turkish nation state takes various actions in order to homogenize the nation and Turkify the economy. Finally, it managed by 1939 to reduce the Greek Orthodox community to about 120,000. Out of this, approximately 100,000 had Turkish citizenship and 20,000 Greek. In 1940, the ancestral homes of Hellenism in the East, after the exchange of the population, do not exist anymore. Hellenism in Egypt, Constantinople, Istanbul, Cyprus, northern Epirus, and on the Deccanese still remain, while Hellenism in the Soviet Union is cut off and marginalized. So after this brief historical retrospect, let me refer to my book that describes the Turkish-Greek relations between the years 1939 and 1944. As soon as I retired, I put a lot of time and effort into research in order to bring to light the untold story of tens of hundreds of young Greek-speaking volunteers of Istanbul who fought against fascism in the Second World War. In the struggle against Nazism and for freedom, there was no scientifically documented, valid, and holistic account of this voluntary contribution. The voluntary contribution of the Greek-speaking non-Muslims of Istanbul during the World War II is truly memorable, not only of their contribution, but mainly because this whole wave of voluntarism was born and raised in a city that they were considered a minority, without state coercion, and especially without their wide social environment being aware of their voluntary service. Sorry. Sorry. In the turbulent 6-year period from 1939 until the end of 1944, many things happened in Greece. The Greek-Italian and Greek-German wars, the occupation of Greece from the forces of Axis, the Great Hunger, the establishment of the government abroad, the reconstruction of the Greek army, and the 3 revolutionary movements of the Greek armed forces in Middle East. The battles in the Middle East, the Battle of Rimini, the liberation, and the events of December 1944 in Athens. The volunteers participate in all these events. The period from 1939 until the end of 1944 will help us understand in what environment and under which conditions these young volunteers from Istanbul lived. It took me 9 years of research for my book to be completed. During this time, I studied Greek and English archives, Greek and Turkish bibliography, as well as the Greek, Turkish, and the Greek Egyptian press, and most importantly, I interviewed over 340 persons. Out of them, 171 are in detail. Now, volume 1, first volume of my book consists of 3 parts. The first part describes chronologically the international events with emphasis on Greek-Turkish relations from 1939 to the end of 1994. The approximately 300 volunteers who fought on the Albanian front were all Greek nationals. In these battles, 20 volunteers lose their lives. In the second part, as I said, drawing information from the volunteers, I have collected personal oral testimonies given to me by the few living volunteers and by their descendants. At the end, I realized that the volunteers had 2 things in common. First, they were all residents of Istanbul, and second, they all spoke Greek. The majority of the volunteers were Greek Orthodox, but there were also Catholics, Jews, Christian Unites, and Armenians. In part 3, there are the conclusions which emerge from the research. Statistical tables are recorded about their place of origin, their education, nationality, religion, etc. Now I would like to say a few words about the first part and about the Greek-Turkish relations of the period. Turkey, as far as I understand, was not a neutral country. It was just trying not to get involved in the war. Greek-Turkish relations at that time were very good. The good relations begin with a proposal of the Greek Prime Minister Eleftherios Venizelos in 1934 to award the Nobel Peace Prize to Kemal Atatürk, and climax in December 1939 when Greece offers aid to the victims of the great earthquake in Erzincan. At that time, Greece and Turkey had common enemies, Bulgaria, Italy, and the Soviet Union. On October 28, 1940, Italy attacks Greece, and the success of Greece and the Albanian front are great. The publications in the Turkish press about the heroic achievements of Greece are many. These enthusiastic articles are published in Turkish newspapers such as Yeni Asır, Ulus, Cumhuriyet, Akşam, Yeni Sabah, etc. Apart from the flattering publications, the Turkish people had also established committees to collect donations for the Hellenic Red Cross. On February 26, the Red Crescent, the Kızılay, donated 3 ambulances to the Greek Red Cross in a special ceremony that took place in Thessaloniki. Turkish Consul Idris Jura emphasizes, we Turks consider the Greek victory as our own victory, and that these actions strengthen the fraternal bonds of friendship between the 2 countries. Sorry. In the book, there are many facts that are not known to many people. such as the Big Bet, the Büyük Kumar of Kızılay's representative, journalist and Greek language expert Feridun Demokan, who activated international organization in the United States and Britain to raise awareness and help Greece during the Great Hunger. He sent photos and articles to Geneva and from there to many other countries. As a result, these photos were published in USA in Life magazine in August 3, 1942. The photos in Life magazine raised the awareness among the international aid organizations and the Greek-American community led by the Archbishop of America, Mr. Athanagoras, later Ecumenical Patriarch, who organized in America the Greek War Relief. President of this organization was Spiros Skouras, the owner of the well-known American film production studio, the 20th Century Fox. Demokan wrote later in his diary, "In the name of the Red Crescent and the Turkish people for the big bet I had made to help my friend and ally Greece, I was compensated by the municipality of Athens, honoring Greek citizenship and medal of the municipality with the emblem of the oath. The Turkish people continue their help to Greece with the dispatch of Kızılay, the famous Red Crescent ship Kurtuluş. And while the response of the Turkish people has always been friendly, the nationalist government of İsmet İnönü, unfortunately, when the conditions were right, it immediately implemented hard policies and anti-minority measures in order to Turkifying the economy and homogenizing the nation. Only a few days after the beginning of the war with Italy, on October 28, 1940, while Greece was fighting against the forces of the Axis, the general and politician Kazım Karabekir in November 1940 came up with the original idea of the wealth tax, known to all of us as varlık vergisi, the tax of excessive financial burden on minorities. The old practices and controversies of 1930s of Turkification are being tried again. Based on that, citizens of Turkey are classified into 4 categories: secular, Muslim no-Turks, like Sunni and Hanafi, Muslims who were not Turks but were candidates for assimilation, such as Pomaks, Bosnians, Laz, etc., the Kurds, who do not wish to be assimilated, and the non-Muslim minority. These are considered ineligible and should either be removed or reduced in population. Varlık vergisi was created in order to cover the large defense expenditures that resulted from the recruitment of about 1 million men in 1939, and also to limit the large number of banknotes issued for this purpose and consequently to tax traders who speculated. Prime Minister Sarajevo on November 11, 1942, presented the varlık vergisi to the Turkish parliament. And the media of the time connected non-Muslims with acts of theft, black market, financial blackmail, speculation, and scandal. The caricatures that were published always ridiculed the non-Muslims. The non-Muslims. Some days after the Germans' entry to Greece, on May 8, 1941, Inonu decides that all non-Muslims, men from 28 to 47 years old, must be conscripted. They were sent to concentration camps in the far end of Asia Minor, and in history this conscription will be known as the conscription of 20 ages. These men spent the harsh winter of 1941 in tents in their summer uniforms. They were plagued by snow, rain, and in summer mosquitoes and tropical malaria throughout their stay. Camps were full of damp, mud, no water, the food provided was poor. In June 1941, the Union government inaugurated its diplomatic relations with Greece by not appointing an ambassador to the exiled Greek government in Cairo. In the second part of my book, as I said, I have interviewed over 340 persons, of which 171 interviews are in detail from the serving volunteers or the relatives, as I said. Although personal stories and experiences are not always considered reliable sources because they are charged with emotion, thoughts, personal views, and memories. However, when the narratives are many and the facts coincide and confirm each other, then they are considered reliable sources, primary and important for drawing useful conclusions. Testimonies are the history, because after all, history is the story of the people. The tracing of the routes of those who choose to go with the Greek troops to the Middle East and join the Allied struggle against the Axis is extremely revealing. In this regard, the warriors at El Alamein are described, some of whom met heroic deaths, such as Biron Potamianos, who was killed in September 1942. On the Albanian front, as I noticed, the vast majority of the volunteers were Greek passport holders. And since 1943, in Middle East, there has been an increase in the number of volunteers having Turkish passports. It should be noted that these individuals knew from the beginning that they would never be able to return to Turkey, as the service of Turkish citizens in a foreign army was considered treason and a serious criminal offense. But even who remained in occupied Greece joined the resistance, such as Vasilios Theophilou, who was a member of a sabotage group, was arrested in one of the operations to blow up an enemy ship in the port of Piraeus and was sentenced to death by a German military court. The Catholic priest from Istanbul, Chrysostomos Vasiliou, who in May 1994 was arrested by the Germans, was convicted as a spy. He was subjected to inhuman torture, and in the morning of September 8, 1944, he and 58 other prisoners were executed. In the Middle East, women volunteers from Istanbul, like Katrin Vitali, the Korfiati sisters Eleni and Adriani, served as combatant in the British Army, since the Greek army of the time had no corps of female combatants. Others served in the Greek army as nurses, like sisters Petrina and Maria Vlachakis, while their brothers Nikolaos Vlachakis served in the Greek army. Now, a few words about another not well-known history of the three revolutionary movements of the Greek armed forces in the Middle East. These revolutionary movements were the Greek movement of March 1943, the Greek movement of July 1943, and the Navy movement in March 1944. In the units they were reorganized in the Middle East, officers of two different categories presented. those who had already served in the army during the dictatorship of Metaxas government, and those who returned to active service, the so-called the Democrats. Rivalries and antipathies developed between these two categories, creating intense problems of military discipline. The anti-royalists demanded the resignation of the government and the formation of a new democratic one. After the last naval movement, the revolt extended to the army and to the air force too. The following days, the British troops suppressed the uprisings. They captured them and gathered them in the prisoners of war camps, POWs. About 7,500 democratic soldiers who did not want the return of the king to Greece after the liberation. The detainees went through a selection committee where they had to declare legitimacy to the government. Those who declared against the return of the king were imprisoned in the camp. Some of these camps were hell. The day was blazing with the sun dust blinded their eyes. Scorpions, snakes, and mice created tragic living conditions. They gave each one of a little water to drink and to cleanse themselves. Sudanese and British soldiers guarded the camp. More than 6 months, they lived in miserable conditions and suffered severe torture. A large number of the volunteers, almost all of whom were Democrats and anti-royal, were imprisoned in these camps. During the 3 revolutionary movements, 20 volunteers from Istanbul lost their lives. After the release from the camps, a large number of the volunteers who had Turkish passport and could not return to Istanbul were characterized leftists and were expelled to the communist countries. A very interesting story is the one of Antonis Michailidis, who ended up in Poland. Volunteers who declared loyalty to the government joined a Greek brigade and fought in the Battle of Rimini against the Germans. After the victorious struggle in Italy, they were sent to Athens to fight against the democratic forces. In the events of December 1944 in Athens, many victims were volunteers such as Konstantin Molfetas. His deformed corpse was recognized by the family photo he had in his pocket. After the events of December 1944, the bloody civil war begins in Greece. Despite the fact that 2 months earlier, in October 1944, the zones of influence in Southeastern Europe were drawn with a percentage agreement. The reporting of a historical event, however tragic it may be, does not appeal to the reader's emotions. When images and personal narratives are added to that same event, the reader identifies with it, as it touches his or her emotional world. Now let me tell you a few words about the second volume of my book. In this volume, after in-depth research, I discovered 80 years later the real causes of the sinking of a caique-type boat named Evangelistria and the inexplicable disappearance of the 78 volunteers returning home to Istanbul. Along with them, thrown the 5 crew members and 2 passengers that is 85 people in total. The second volume of my book will be published in Greek and in English as well. On April 27, 1941, when the German troops entered Greece, they confiscated all the food for their army. The British Navy, from the other side, in order to ban the supply of Germans, imposed a naval blockade, and as a result, the Great Hunger began in Greece. The volunteers from Istanbul, when they arrived in Athens, coming from the front, they were homeless, hungry, and many of them sick. Those who had no friends or relatives slept wherever they could find. Transportation was poor. Train transports were not running due to the destruction of most bridges, and steamship services were non-existent. The ships had confiscated by the Germans. Some of the volunteers decided to charter a ship, so 78 of them chartered the Evangelistria, and on July the 3rd, they departed from the port of Piraeus. The next way, on their way to Istanbul, the 1st of July 1941, a few hours before their arrival to the beloved Istanbul, an English submarine attacked them. The ship was quickly engulfed in flames and sank, and none of the 85 people survived. Let's see how the event is described in the submarine's logbook and in patrol report. July 4, 1941. At 6:15, the submarine sighted a large caique of about 100 tons on the direct course from the Douro Channel to Lemnos. The caique was well filled with troops and stores. At 6:59 hours, the submarine surfaced in position 84 degrees from Douro Islands and 80.5 nautical miles, and they engaged the caique with gunfire. The caique finally sank at 9:43 hours. This was most likely the Evangelistria. More detailed information gives us the submarine's patrol report. Those years, the submarine patrolled the Mediterranean Sea and made similar attacks to schooners and caiques. During its second patrol in the Aegean Sea in July 1941, launched a series of gun attacks on schooners and boats carrying German troops, sometimes killing survivors. That's why the commander of this submarine at the end of the war was accused of war crimes by various sources, and the major English newspaper in February 1989, in front page article referred to these cases. A submarine officer later described one of the attacks, noting the troops were not allowed to escape. Everything and everybody was destroyed by one sort of gunfire or another. The question is if the case of Evangelistria and the death of 85 volunteers will add another dimension to this case. I have gathered a lot of documents and description unknown until today about the particular commander. Let me remind you that for similar actions, the German commander of submarine U-boat type, Hans Wilhelm Eck, together with two of his officers, were executed on November 30, 1945 in Hamburg. So these and many more will be included in the second volume of my book, which will be titled Evangelistria and the Volunteers from Istanbul during World War II. I will close my speech saying that out of a total of about 900 volunteers from Istanbul who fought in the World War II, 200 of them were killed fighting against the fascists. They fought so we can enjoy our freedom today. For the memory, in November 2019, we built a monument bearing their names. Unfortunately, today in Istanbul, a very small community of those minorities remain. The big Greek Orthodox community to which I belong has diminished remarkably from 320 in 1923. Today does not exceed 2,000 people. In 1983, the Greek politician, philosopher, and academic who assumed the presidency of the Greek government for 2 short terms, Mr. Panagiotis Kanellopoulos, was saying, the geographical space in which the Greek and Turkish people are living no longer raises chauvinist and adventurous ventures, not even nationalism. This area, which is one of the most sensitive and critical areas on the earth, impose friendship and cooperation between the 2 peoples. Thank you for listening.